Um, I'm going to give an opening discussion here just for about 10 minutes or so, maybe even less, and hopefully some other folks will come in. We should have more people here than we do have. So I did remind my students that 10:30 Ollie time is really 10:30 as opposed to campus time, which is 10:40. So we'll give everybody a few minutes. So what I want to do to open today's intergenerational dialogue, and again, thanks to all of you for being here, is I'm going to go over a couple of things. I'm just going to give some opening comments. I want to show you the results of the survey that both OLLI members and students filled out, because there's interesting areas where we are in agreement, but there's also some really interesting differences that you can perhaps chat about when you go into your breakout discussions. And then I'm going to basically start the first discussion set or breakout session with basically a focus question to help get the discussion started. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Let's see. Hold on. Advanced? Nope. Here we go. And I'll hit play, and you should all be able to see this. Hopefully you can. If you can't see it, let somebody know. So words over time, saving democracy, Spring 2022. Here we go. So why are we here talking about saving democracy? Well, it's because I think we can all agree to at least a certain extent that there are both internal threats and external threats that we really have not had to deal with until I would say the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 years or so. We could summarize those differences perhaps as, on the one hand, globally, the difference between, or the competition between money versus ideals. What I mean by that is there are a number of countries, a number of leaders in the world who think that, you know what people want? People just want to get rich. And if they can get rich, they don't really care about democracy. Freedom is not really, the ideals of democracy are not really worth it. If you say, hey, we're suspending democracy, but you're all going to get richer, that's better. There's also plenty of people, both in the United States and also around the world, who think that stability is what people want more than freedom. And they look at, if you watch Chinese TV, they're always showing pictures of homeless encampments saying, see, democracy has failed. They can't take care of their own people. We don't have homelessness in China because people want stability and things like that. Now, that makes it easy to think in terms of, say, kind of a new Cold War mentality. But actually, as I was putting these together this morning, an article appeared from The Atlantic, which is known to be, for the most part, a relatively progressive or at least liberal publication. And I want to share with you a couple of things from this. The first one is that they actually changed the title, because when it first appeared, the original title was "Don't Let the Community Have a Say." Don't let the community have a say. The idea was communities are blocking progress, that basically local democracy is blocking progress, and governments should basically make decisions and do what they want to do and ignore what local communities have to say about it. And Berkeley makes an appearance in this article because of the attempt to block the expansion of UC Berkeley and student housing. The idea was we shouldn't listen to them, that basically local communities are filled with NIMBYs. After an outcry, within 1 hour of publishing this, they turned it into community input is bad, actually. I guess is a little less authoritarian sounding. They left the subtitle, but here's just a little bit more about this. Here's a quote, basically a short paragraph from the article itself. It's easy to find if you subscribe to The Atlantic or have a news feed where you can get it. The article basically says that local democracy is not fair because some local communities are stronger than others, and that creates an asymmetry problem that basically the government should be able to bulldoze over in the interest of what the government thinks is the right way to do things. So this is kind of an internal threat, you might say. So illustrating the asymmetry problem, asymmetry of power in miniature, in the middle of a phone call with Einstein, one of the Boston University researchers lost her cell service. When she called me back, she explained that residents of a town she drives through on her way home from work successfully engaged in a community input program to succeeded to prevent the construction of a cell phone tower, participatory democracy. So I guess the idea here is that the local community should have been ignored and the cell phone should have been built so that people don't lose cell phone service. The greater good outweighs local democracy. Interesting take. All right, So here we go. Next up, the results are in. Let's take a look at that survey you all filled out because, as always, interesting things to find here. First of all, here we have this first question. With that in mind, which of the following best represents how you feel about the current state of democracy? Oh, and to remind all of you, you will get a PDF of all this entire slide deck. I'll send the PDF out to all of you. That's both undergraduate students and OLLI members. So don't feel like you have to do a screen capture or scribble notes down. You will receive these just as you see them. Interesting here. So how do you feel about the current state of democracy? OLLI members, 63% are very concerned about the future of global democracy, whereas undergrads, that's only 36%, which I found quite interesting. Far fewer, not quite half, but far fewer undergrads were very concerned about the future of global democracy. More undergrads seem to be somewhat concerned, and nobody, it seems, neither undergrads nor OLLI members are optimistic about the future of global democracy. So we at least have that. So between the first two categories, I guess we could say that a majority of us are at least somewhat concerned, but there's far more OLLI members who are very concerned versus somewhat concerned. What's up next? What's our next question? Well, here we go. Which of the following best represents how you feel about democracy in the United States? Now, this is also interesting because the first question was about global democracy. This is about American democracy. Look at that, OLLI members, almost 93% are very concerned about the state of American democracy. Very few somewhat optimistic. On the undergrad side, surprisingly, 56% are very concerned and 36% are somewhat concerned. So I was surprised to see far more concern, or maybe I'm not surprised to see far more concern about the state of American democracy from OLLI members. These are the kinds of things we can talk about in the breakout rooms where you can say, hey, what was behind the, there's less concern among Cal undergrads in terms of being very concerned about American democracy, and, get a chance to hear what the answers are, because this only shows us what the responses were. It doesn't give us a qualitative assessment. This question is spread out over a few slides. This was basically where I threw in a number of factors, and I said, which of these do you feel represents the biggest threat to the vibrancy of democracy in the United States? And the way the answers are is with each of the factors I listed, you can see it's color-coded by how many people said this was their number 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 answer. One was the most important threat. Some of these, there's a good match. Some of these are quite different. If you look at hyperpartisanship, I'd say that's pretty close. Interestingly, I would say there's more concern on the OLLI member side about hyperpartisanship. The growing link between money and politics on the left or right, again, I would say in this case, we have roughly equal concern in terms of ranking it number 1 between undergrads and OLLI members, but there's perhaps, it was ranked number 4 was the most common answer for the OLLI members, so that means less concern. Lack of trust in democratic institutions, again, I would say much higher percentage of Cal undergrads ranking at 3, so you have, I'd say, a little more concern about that among the undergrads than the OLLI members. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Look at the misinformation, disinformation, and destabilization of truth. That's a massive difference. Look at that means the vast majority of OLLI members thought this is the biggest threat to democracy. Misinformation, disinformation, and the destabilization of truth. We have over 50% of OLLI members ranking that as number 1, and then only a little over 10% of undergrads doing the same. That's quite a distinction there. And lastly, we have one more category in this, which is interesting: systemic racism and/or racial equality. Note that little over 20% of undergrads ranked that as number 1. There was not a single OLLI member who said it was number 1. 0% on the OLLI side that systemic racism or racial inequality was the most important threat, whereas 20% of the undergrads said so. So we have, I guess, less concern about this factor, as you see going right, because orange means it was ranked number 5 than we do on the undergraduate side. All right, next up. This is interesting. Here we go. In general, I view China and/or Xi Jinping as a threat to global democracy. Not a huge difference here. More undergrads see that as true as opposed to OLLI members, but it's still, I would call this a reasonably balanced response. More OLLI members, slightly more OLLI members do not see China as a threat. But look at the next slide, which is the same question with Russia and Putin. That's unescapable. I think we can say with absolute clarity that both undergrads and OLLI members think that Russia and Vladimir Putin are a very large threat to global democracy. I mean, 84% and almost 93% for the OLLI members. And so this is agreement, but a very huge difference between how we see China versus how we see Russia. So another interesting point to perhaps talk about in the breakout sessions. All right, a few more questions to go. This is almost complete agreement. What's going on here? Which of the following best represents your perception of the relationship between race relations and or identity politics and democracy? And it looks like the vast majority of both groups said that addressing and improving race relations and or identity politics is absolutely necessary if democracy is to recover and thrive in the United States, which is interesting because of the differential rankings in terms of which was the greatest threat to American democracy. This is a question simply about race relations. So here the numbers are, I would say, within statistical measure, almost exactly the same. What do we have here? Now, this is, I found this for some reason just fascinating. So according to the critics of Western democracy, the primary source of our weakness is too much freedom for our citizens. I said, which of the following fundamental rights do you think should be scaled back to allow American democracy to move forward? And you can check as many as you wanted. So on the one hand, both groups agreed that freedom of religion was the right we need to scale back most. And I find it interesting. I'd really love to hear from some of you when we do we're going to do both breakout rooms and kind of a joint discussion to hear about this. Because as a reminder, if you're scaling back freedom of religion, it's not just one religion, it's all religions. So things like, celebrating Ramadan, having Ramadan be an official holiday, that's part of that. Scaling that back would mean maybe no more religious holidays for anyone. We've got freedom of speech, roughly equal, more people concerned about guns, a few more people concerned about gun rights on the undergrad side, far more students saying no fundamental rights should be scaled back at all. 36% undergrads saying no scaling back, 15% of OLLI members, less than half, saying the same. Okay, what's up next? Another huge difference. Which of the following best represents your perspective on the Supreme Court? This, again, I found really fascinating. OLLI members, 63%. The current conservative majority is a fundamental threat to American democracy. Look at the undergrads. Only 16% felt that the current conservative majority is a fundamental threat to American democracy. That's a huge difference. So what we see, and this kind of surprised me, is that among undergrads, we have 16%, and then we also have, I have no problem with the current conservative majority, well over 10%. And then if you look at the OLLI members, 0% for that. So very clearly, OLLI members have, we have 24% saying I'd like to see a little majority on the undergrad side, fewer saying that. The good news is nobody wanted to see the court packed. But I found especially the one about the concern over the conservative majority, for some reason, I thought the undergrads would be far more concerned. It turns out to be something of the opposite. 48% of undergrads said they'd like to see a balance. So that's kind of interesting. So more things to talk about in our breakout sessions. I think this is the last question. In which of the following areas do you think, actually, no, there is one more question. In which of the following areas do you think political leaders and policymakers in the United States have taken the lead or shown innovation and progress? The one place we are on clear agreement on this is the category that says, I do not think effective leadership has been shown in any of these areas. So undergrads and OLLI members, you seem to both agree that we are having a leadership crisis in American democracy. Aside from that, there are some interesting differences. Lots of OLLI members said transportation and infrastructure, far fewer undergrads said that. Education, far more undergraduates, almost twice as many said that's where we've done well. A little more on climate change. I think it's interesting though, security, military security, undergrads said almost 30%, where we had about half of that on the OLLI side. So some interesting differences here. Again, to remind all of you, you will get these slides. I'll send the PDF out as soon as we finish today. I'll send it to OLLI and I'll send it to my undergrads. So you'll have plenty of time to kind of just go over this, let it sink in. Right now, I'm just throwing out some points. Hopefully, if you have anything you'd like to talk about in the breakout rooms, you can certainly post that or certainly ask those in the breakout sessions. Lastly, there's one last question on Ukraine, which is, how do you feel about Ukraine? And on this, we have roughly some agreement, especially in the two middle categories. More undergraduates said that the war in Ukraine will entrench and exacerbate the failures of democratic leadership in global politics and will lead to decline. So a little more pessimism and concern by undergrads. The war in Ukraine will lead to a more unstable global order that will favor democracy over autocracy. A little more optimism, you might say, on the Ali side, but both share a concern or I should say both, there's 32% and 37% who are saying that the war in Ukraine is going to lead to a newfound unity among democratic countries. So some interesting places where we definitely agree, some interesting places where there are some profound differences. All right. So having said that, it is now time to talk, everyone. So let me tell everybody the way it's worked. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you we're going to do 2 discussion sessions in breakout rooms. So you'll get a chance to talk in smaller groups. And what I'll do for each of them is, and I'll show you the first session here, we're going to share this slide for you in the breakout session. So when you get into your breakout rooms, you can always refer back to this. What I like to do is put a question to get your discussion started. If your discussion veers in a different direction, don't worry about it, because after the discussion session, we're going to come back to the breakout rooms and kind of share some of the things we talked about. So to get us started, here's what I came up with. In the project of saving democracy, if you had to prioritize your efforts, where would you start? As in, what would be number 1 on your list of priorities? If you said we got to start somewhere, you can give me one answer of where we should start, what would it be? Or to put it differently, if democracy were to disappear, what do you think you would miss the most? So it's kind of the same question, just reworded. Again, this might help you get your discussion started. Hopefully it will. Don't forget to introduce yourselves when you get to your breakout rooms either. And then after you're in the breakout rooms, I'll reshare this slide so you can always come back to it. But again, if your discussion veers in its own direction, just go with the flow. The point here is to have an intergenerational dialogue that we can get the most out of. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides at this point, if I can find a way to do that, which apparently I can't. Oh, there we go. That worked. And so let me go over, and I think I need to turn this over to Max, if I'm correct, and he will instruct you as to about how the breakout rooms are going to work. Is that correct, Max?
Off they go. Any latecomers would still be here.
We have
put you 3 in some rooms. Hold on.
Okay. And it's done. So shall I now share my slide and do the breakout room thing?
Yeah.
All right, here we go. Share screen. Screwed it up, sorry. One more time. Forgot to click the magic box. All right, there we go. How was that for an opening? Okay.
That was excellent, I thought. Yeah, very good. Do we have students in every room?
Yeah.
Room 7?
Room 7. Let me look. People could have left. Yeah, Mia and Samantha Comfort.
Okay. Fantastic.
Some of them didn't put S, but I searched. I saw the ones that were under 50, and they were the students. Right. It's a subtle art to put people in breakout rooms, to be honest.
Thanks,
Looks like
Max.
Yes, Max. You know, to the whole team, thank you. I couldn't do this alone. That's for sure.
There might be one group with one student, but I don't think so. I had to move a lot of people around behind the scenes.
Okay.
But if they got an issue, they can message.
All right. So those started at 10:50. I would say send maybe around 11:10, 11:10 or 11:12, send a thing that says you have whatever, 2 more minutes, 3 more minutes.
Yeah, no problem. I'll
Okay.
make it. I usually do it by a timer on my phone.
Okay, perfect.
Guys, I'm going to take a break and be right back as the breakout groups are coming in.
Yeah.
Okay, take care.
Okay.
You know, if you go to Keynote preferences, you can tell Keynote to show your pointer.
Okay, I might do that. I can't do it now because I have to get out of the slide. I want to leave the slide up as it is. I have it on full screen and I can't unless I have to kind of hit escape.
Yeah.
So maybe for the,
But
maybe
just,
for the next session.
Whatever. You just go to where it says Keynote and then preferences. I forget exactly what you got to do, but it's like 1 or 2 clicks and just
Okay.
tell it to show pointer well.
Okay.
Slideshow. I can send you a link if you want.
Okay. I think we're pretty much all back in. Welcome back. It's kind of like transporting you to like a separate dimension. It's like you went to a parallel universe for a time and now you came back. I imagine this is what it's like to be like beamed down to a different planet or something like that. Not sure. So welcome back, everybody. Here's what we're going to do now. So all of you, I hope, are familiar with Marvel's multiverse. I love it. Are familiar with the great hand of Zoom. So what I'd like to do now, since we all went to separate breakout sessions, and we'll do you're going to go back to the same breakout rooms for our second question, or our second session, I should say. Let's take a few minutes and kind of share what we learned, because every group always has something different to discuss. And so what I'd like you to do is, if you'd like to volunteer to either share some of the insights of your group or ask a further question or anything like that, please raise your Zoom hand, because I will see your Zoom hand and then I can call on you and I can say, yes, what would you like to tell us about what your group had to say? Or, you know, if you'd like to clarify, for instance, if you talked about what might explain the differences between the respondents, between the OLLI members and the undergrads, if you'd like to add anything, just if you don't know where it is, if you go down to reactions, which should be on the bottom of your screen or on your menu somewhere, if you click on reactions, you'll see one that says raise hand. And if you raise your hand, I will see your hand immediately. It looks like Barry has raised his hand first. So Barry, go right ahead. Go unmute yourself first and then go ahead and tell us what you got to say.
It was a great group and I got 2 things out of it, and they were also my preferences. First was financial opportunity, brought up by Lee, a student. That is very important. And the other was truth, knowing the truth. How do we know the truth? And that we don't agree on the truth. was brought up by one of the Ollie members,
Okay.
Adrian. So those were the two things that our group, and me interpreting it, got out of it.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing that. Appreciate it, Barry. Anyone else? Any students? See, looks like Beatrice has her hand up. Yes, Beatrice.
Yeah, I think we had towards the end a great kind of conversation about where an Ollie member asked, why aren't we seeing more protests or movements on campuses to kind of, invoke change and protest for change. And what Alyssa and I spoke about in our group on behalf of undergrads is that we felt as though, I can't say compared to back then because I wasn't alive, or but that we felt as though today students have more stress, we're more fatigued, we have more concerns with regards to, figuring out our futures, getting good jobs, doing well academically, just making it by, students are working 2-3 jobs in addition to being full-time students. And so it's created a sort of dynamic where it seems as though it's become a privilege to be able to, participate in protests and movements. And that also then, in comparison to maybe more conservative movements, it seems as though the liberal movements are a lot more shattered and dispersed, and we're not as focused and concentrated on, falling in line and supporting, a cause and making it happen with, instead to have, someone talking about housing, someone talking about voting rights, someone talking about climate, and maybe not discussing how they're all interconnected, but instead pointing fingers as to, you need to be on our side, or, this is our priority. And I think we even see it happening in politics today, is that the liberals aren't as concentrated, focused, or wanting to collaborate, for the benefit of the good of all of us.
Wow, that's quite a bit. And thanks for all the insights. That's quite a bit to think over. We got one other hand up. And after that, I'm going to introduce our second focus question for our second session. And we'll do the same thing where we come back out and we have a chance to wrap things up and have another shared discussion. So Nancy, I see your hand is up. What would you like to add? Go ahead and unmute yourself first and then jump on in.
All right. I think most of our group believed that we should get money out of politics, that we had to get rid of Citizens United because elections are being bought. And then there were some other things, but that was, 3 minutes ago and I forgot.
Well, you'll rediscover them hopefully when you go back to your groups. But thank you, Nancy, for sharing your insights. I mean, at least that one insight, what to do about money in politics is a huge issue. Absolutely. All right. So thanks to those of you for sharing your insights. So that here's what we're going to do now. So, like as with the first session, I will give you another focus question. Same thing holds true. It's a place to get the next phase of the discussion going. You can always revisit things you talked about in the first session if you would like to. Otherwise, here's my second question for you. I'll leave it up. You'll be able to see it in the breakout rooms for at least for a few minutes. So let me just show you what I've got. Here's our second focus question. It looks like this. According to Putin, Western democracy is now obsolete because it is weak, messy, and inefficient. Which raises the question of, if true, what would it take to make democracy strong, clean, and efficient? Or put differently, if you were at the other end of a very long table, hopefully you get that reference because Putin is obsessed with, really long tables. What counter argument would you offer to Putin to say that no, democracy is not weak, messy, inefficient? Here's what it is. Here's the benefits of democracy. So what's the counter argument you could offer to that? So that is the start of the focus question. When you get to the into your breakout sessions, I'll share it again in case you forget it. But again, feel free to let your conversation go where it will, and we will come back again after about 20, perhaps 23 minutes or so, and leave the last 10 minutes again to share our thoughts on things. So Max, time to do that magic thing where you send people into the Marvel metaverse or the other universe, wherever they're going. We have a few full, there we go. One more. I think we've got one person.
Were you in a room previously? You can unmute yourself. Otherwise, I will put you in room 4.
Yes, I was in a group, but I switched to the iPad because on my TV, I can't speak. I had to use notes.
Oh, yes. Do you
So
remember who you were with?
I was with a group that Rani Cochran.
Oh, with
was
Ronnie. Okay,
Yeah.
that is number 3. One moment. All right.
Darren, what do you, oops, okay.
Anyway, I guess we're all back now. And so we are, believe it or not, we have about 12 minutes left. And so what I'd like to do is do the same thing I did the first time around. But remember, we can revisit discussions we had in the first session as well, if you continued them. What I'd like to do, because again, we're all in different breakout rooms, it would be nice if we could, hear a summary or hear some reactions or insights that you'd like to share of things that came up in your group, so that people who were not in your group can say, well, our discussion was like that too, or we had a different conclusion. So again, you can do a couple of things here. You can raise your Zoom hand, which is, you can find it on your menu bar under reactions. It'll say raise hand. If I see a hand raised, I can call on you immediately, or you could always type something in the chat as well. Unfortunately, I can't just unmute everybody because that gets a little crazy with 46 people. So would anyone like to, actually, let me start with the undergrad students first. Any of you would like to share a reaction or an insight, or kind of give me an idea of what you talked about in your group? Anybody want to join in? Any students? Any hands going to go up? Everyone's feeling shy. Let's see. All right, there's one hand up. It's Lee. Yes, Lee.
Hello. I can start us off a little bit. I think one thing that popped in our group that I find very interesting is the idea of hope and optimism.
Okay.
As undergrad who's about to graduate and go into the working world, although I didn't answer being an optimist, but once Mark pointed out the difference, I think I'm very optimistic, and a lot of Berkeley kids should be. I don't speak for everyone, of course, but we are very optimistic. We are the type that we don't really know what to do, but we will get up and do it once we find a solution, and we'll work towards it in our own little ways. It might take us a little bit longer because we're young. We might stumble a bit, but I'm very optimistic for all of us, actually.
Interesting. I'm curious to see. Thanks for that, Lee. I mean, because I will be honest, I've heard kind of mixed reactions to things like this, in the sense that I'm happy to hear that at least you and perhaps several others are feeling that sense of optimism. I know with some folks, it's been a little bit of, like, especially since things have started in Ukraine, like, what's the point? And so it's I'm glad to hear that you're still having a sense of optimism, that you'll push on through. Let's see what Jessica has to say to add to that. Yes, Jessica.
In our group, we talked a lot about the messiness part of the first question. And I think our consensus was that, like, Putin might think that messiness is a bad thing because it's just going to take a long time and inefficient. So he considers it as a bad thing. But as we were talking, I think I kind of got the feeling that a lot of people in my group were saying that it is bound, like, democracy is bound to be messy, and it's supposed to be messy because we're trying to include a lot of people's opinions. So of course it's going to be messy. So I think what I took from my group is that, like, messiness is not like a bad thing, that Putin, or I don't want to say just like Putin, but like messiness is not necessarily bad, but it might be the indication that we're doing something good.
All right, thank you for that. I like that. I think you're right. Democracy has a certain amount of inherent messiness, and I guess the question is how much is too much, but we can come back to that maybe some other time. Let's see what Beatrice has to add. Yes, Beatrice.
Yeah, I was just going to touch on, we had a great discussion towards the end with regards to voter turnout and how a lot of younger people aren't voting. And I thought it was interesting to kind of hear how, or we were just discussing about, what are your duties as a citizen and versus, the rights that you earn, and how a lot of the emphasis among young people today are, what are our rights, and, we're emphasizing our rights, but not as much talking about, what are our duties and obligations as citizens to earn those rights. And so just kind of touching on, what are ways to kind of inspire a certain incentive amongst young individuals to want to or to understand their, responsibility and obligation to vote and participate in order to deserve those rights.
Well said. Eloquently said, I should say. Thank you so much for that insight, Beatrice. Let me, since we're down to 8 minutes left, it's unbelievable. Any of the OLLI members, of course, students, you can always time in anytime you want, but OLLI members, would you like to share anything, or would you like to comment on how awesome the undergrads are, or share your insights, anything like that? Feel free to raise your hand, or let's see if anybody's typing anything in the chat. Not just yet. Let's see, we've got Mark and Marjorie. Yes, go right ahead. All yours.
So one of the things that our group expressed to our 2 undergraduates is how glad we are that they were part of this conversation, and how much we appreciate what you've been doing, Darren, to connect us older folks to your younger students. It's been a really wonderful part of our experience, and I know OLLI wants to have more connection with undergraduates. So this is a huge step in that direction. And it goes back years that you started this, Darren, and it's had some pretty big effects on some of us. So thank you.
Well, I'm happy to make it happen, and I'm glad to see the positive reaction. I can assure all of you that I'll hear the exact same things from my undergrads as soon as we get to meet again. And so thanks for that. Let's see, we got a couple more hands up here. First, I'll go to Jackie and then to Bill. So yes, Jackie.
Oh, sorry. There we go.
Yeah,
ditto to what the previous person just said. And our group talked a lot about how important it is to have people talking to each other across differences. And I think that's a big message, thanks to you, that you keep coming back to as a requisite solution. It has to start there. So.
It does. And one of the things we talked about in our weekly meetings, that is me with the undergrads, is we've talked at length about this, which is how do you start the conversation? How do you bring in people? How do you avoid the shouting match? And so I'm glad it came up in your group discussions as well. So thanks for sharing that.
I'm going to chime in there. There's a group called Braver Angels. It used to be Better Angels, and they're organizing not just living room conversations, but they have an initiative coming up that's going to involve lawmakers talking to each other, and I have a lot of hope for that. It might start small, but it needs to spread. So,
all right, we'll work on that for the future. Got another hand up here from Bill. Bill, unmute yourself. Go right ahead.
I was particularly impressed, as I almost always am, by the students in my group. And what I would say to fellow OLLI members, I stay very involved with students at UC Santa Cruz, my alma mater, and I find that it's a very good way to feed hope about the future, when from an old person's standpoint, it sometimes looks like the world's going to hell in a handbasket.
Yeah. And sometimes we all have those days when the whole world's going to hell in a handbasket, but then sometimes we have this influx of optimism, which makes us think it's going to be all right. A few minutes left. Looks like Gregory, your hand is up. So why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself? And if you got a comment to add, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to say I appreciated, we had one undergraduate, Jessica, and I appreciated her thoughtfulness and incisive view of things. I really appreciate that. And then I also appreciate, I think somebody in the plenary talked about the challenges confronted by undergraduates. And I can really appreciate that. Back in the day when many of us OLLI people were going through a semester might have cost a couple of hundred, a unit might have cost $100, maybe less, maybe a little more. And currently the challenge is not only of costs, but also of the environment, of the workload and all of that. So I really appreciate what you're going through and the attention that you need to pay to that. When some of us were out demonstrating, you may not have the time, because if you do that, your opportunity would be closed.
Yeah, I mean, and thanks for saying that. I appreciate it, because it is important to recognize that, getting an undergraduate education now is such a complete universe away from what it used to be. And it's easy to not realize that, which is, one of the many benefits that comes out of the dialogue with this, is where we get to hear, what it's like. It's like, oh, that's what it's like to go to school now. When I was there, yes, it was either cheaper, or there were, the kind of concerns and worries that undergraduates have now weren't around then. So I appreciate your insights. Thank you for that, Gregory, and thanks for acknowledging the wonderful contributions of the undergrad students as well. All right, folks, guess what? It's 11:57. So here's what I have to do now with almost a great sense of kind of sadness, but also happiness. Somebody's, let's see, Andrea has a quote to share. She's a very special quote from one of our Ollies on that said, "The messiness is the absolute beauty of democracy." Thank you for sharing that, Andrea, in the chat. Like it. So here's the deal. Unfortunately, this happened later in the semester than we wanted just because there were so many other things scheduled, but we do have one. Next week is the last week of classes, and I always like to invite Ollie folks who participated here to join us for our weekly meetings, which happen on Wednesdays from 2 to 3 p.m. Don't worry, we will email this to all of you, let you know when it happens. We're going to try to do something. I'm going to see if it's feasible to possibly meet in person as opposed to Zoom, and it would be outside. So if you wear a mask and we're outside, that's probably the safest way we could do it. Hopefully the weather will hold up. If we can't do it that way, then certainly I'll send you a Zoom link. But I think the undergrads were especially keen to perhaps see you as 3D carbon-based life forms as opposed to a 2D screen. So be on the lookout for an email from Ollie about how we're going to arrange that. That's next Wednesday, 2 to 3. If you can't make it, we'll do these again in the future. As long as you're interested, you know, we're interested too, and so are the Berkeley undergrads. So be on the lookout for that. Of course, my undergrads know we meet 2 to 3. Next week is our last meeting, as sad as I am to say that. Let me give a big thank you to all of you for being here. Both Ollie members and undergrads, you have no idea how much your participation means to me. I have moments like this where I'm like, wow, I get paid to hang out with two of the coolest groups, you know, on the planet. And the best thing is when we do this, we're not two of the coolest groups. We're the same group now. Okay, we're just kind of like, you know, the honorary cool kids everybody else wishes they could be. But seriously, thank you for your time. Thank you for believing in this project. I know at the end of the semester we're tired, or if you're not an undergrad, you're probably just tired because the world is wearing us down. But I hear some optimism in the comments. I hear optimism from your comments, and so let's kind of keep things going in the right direction. And I look forward to seeing all of you again. Well, very, very soon. Let me ask if Susan has any follow-up comments. If she any last things she might want to say. Susan, are you there? Do you have anything you want to add before we sign off?
Darren, no, I just want to add my own, congratulations to everyone for the last 90 minutes and the exchanges that we've all had. And Darren, thank you for leading us. I want to thank Rob and Max, who are behind the screens here, managing the technology. And I think this is a really worthwhile venture. And so return to the PDFs that we'll send you. I think there's a lot of conversation you can have, with your families and with your colleagues and with your student friends. What is this difference about, and how can we begin to keep the sort of narrative going around the kind of work we want to do together? So Darren, again, thank you.
Absolutely, and I'll sign off on that. Everybody have a lovely rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing you all again in some format soon enough. All right, take care, everybody.